Hey, everybody, welcome to this episode of Think Business Live. Looking forward to talking to Mary Darginis. Mary, it's great to connect with you. I appreciate our mutual friend, Lou Diamond, introducing us. You're the founder and president of MDA Hospitality Solutions. So, Mary, I'm a business coach. I work with successful people, solopreneurs to Fortune companies that are stuck and get them unstuck. And the foundation of this show is really to bring on guests to be in alignment with my mission to get people unstuck. And sometimes it's that one thing, that one syllable, that one pause where they hear an idea of your journey that allows them to really not only grow personally, but professionally. So I appreciate you taking time to be on the show and share some wisdom with our guests. Your bio is so long, I don't even know where to begin, but it's a pretty cool bio. So I'm going to read a bunch of it. You grew up practically in hotels, and your family spent summers traveling through properties, and your father and your sister you just spent a lot of time kind of people watching, and your love for the hotel industry was born through all of these annual trips. And you've done amazing things with companies such as working at Walt Disney World and Four Seasons and the Mandarin Hotels and Fairmont. I mean, you've done amazing things, and you really, you specialize in the hospitality suite and doing custom training to bring very high-end elements to, how they work. I love traveling. I love staying in hotels. My family and I, we don't Airbnb because we like the experience of being in a hotel. Just the feeling of just no responsibilities whatsoever. And so you've done pretty amazing things. My first question is, what makes a great experience?
Well, I believe the best experiences come from the people that work in the properties. So you can stay in some of the best places in the world, but unless they have engaged team members that really care about what they do and have a passion for what they do, it really can impact your experience as a guest. So I think that's the number one focus of any company should be their employees.
Yeah. So let's talk about that, because you provide skill-based employee training and as we talked about, very service-centric industries. And you work with the likes of Fortune 100 ranked companies, international hospitality companies, telecommunications, luxury residential communities. We were talking right before we got on also national grocers. And so when it comes to training, there's such a differential between walking in. My family and I, we were just in London at the Rosewood, if you've been there, and just the way that they talk to you and smile, and the soft skills plus the processes of how they attend to every need is really spectacular. And so let's just kind of dive into that, right? So, and rewind when it comes to making sure you have the right people that are even coachable to give the people that are walking in the door that not only experience, but the energy required within what they're being taught. So talk a little bit about that, if you could.
Sure. So I think that when we think about those soft skills, it's very difficult to teach someone how to smile. They either smile and they care about others, or they just don't have that demeanor. So the number one thing that we want to do is find people that really care about making others happy and comfortable. Once we do that, then it's a matter of how do we teach the technical aspects of the job? Because even though you could have someone that's very amenable and friendly and hospitable, they may not understand the nuances of the role or the company. So that's important that we teach those technical skills.
Yeah. And so how do you teach them? I think today, teaching today, as we sit here, this will get put on the podcast, but as we sit here live, on August 3rd, 2022, how do you teach people today? Teach people in a hybrid world, teach people where someone may be nervous because of COVID to get near someone, shake their hand, right? And so how does teaching today differ from a pre-COVID world?
I don't really think that the approach of teaching changed much between pre-COVID and post-COVID. I think what happened was companies perhaps approached it differently. They heard a lot of what the employees were asking for, and they're delivering upon that. I think even before COVID, employees always wanted to be taught and be part of that culture. But now it's front and center because they are taking an active role in how they feel about their positions, their employment, their companies. And so they're being heard. So I don't think it's changed other than that it's a large focus right now.
Yeah. Mary, let's talk about, employees playing an active role and being heard. If you rewind, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, that wasn't the environment of any workplace where, you could actually have an active role in being heard. And so what's one of the ways that companies can elevate to this? Because I think a lot of companies aren't as open as they need to be for this active feedback. They're not, they'll spend $2 million on trying to figure out what the customer wants, when really, if they just had more of an open environment, their employees, or forget the customers for a minute, but their employees would tell them, right? So how do you elevate to this if you're behind in this?
Well, I think you bring up a great point. We spend millions of dollars trying to understand what the customer wants, and we spend millions and hundreds of millions of dollars building great buildings, right?
Yeah.
But we talk about how the people make that difference and what do we invest in them. In order to really hear them, we need to understand what they do every day. To stand in the same position, let's take a barista, for example, to stand in the same position for 8 hours or 10 hours at a time, making coffees day after day, what is it that inspires and motivates that employee to do that?
Right.
And that's really what we need to understand. And then also, how do we get every barista that's performing that role to do it in a way that the company wants?
Yeah.
And the way that meets their needs. So I think that it's a long process to get to that point, to understand how do we create that experience. And so it's a lot of interaction with them. It's understanding the nuances of their job. No two places are identical. So we have to understand what it is, the equipment that they're working with, the environment, where they're located. So we have to understand the full, complete picture to understand how we can impact them positively.
Yeah. Why are some people, do you think, so scared to look at the whole complete picture? Like you said, hundreds of millions on a building, millions of dollars in this, but a lot of times, sometimes people will not be open and accessible and approachable to the employees who have the best ideas, those nuanced ideas. What is that?
Well, I think it takes time.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of opinions that come into play. And what we do is we bridge that gap. We take the objectives of the company, and then we learn what makes it positive for the team members or employees. And we write in a way that allows the team to be successful and allows the owners and managers of companies to say, okay, to agree with that's the way that the process should be.
Yeah.
So we bridge that divide between the two and take that time to understand the needs of both.
Yeah. I want to just kind of zoom out for a minute, because you're talking about, your writing and things of that nature. And I have a couple of questions about what you just said, but I just want for the Think community to know, one of the things that Mary and her company do, MDA Hospitality, is while you're running your operation, they are busy ensuring your employees are effectively trained to deliver the exceptional customer service. And they create training tailored for each individual company, which is part of, but not limited to, writing, engaging training manuals and training employees in person and virtually, and basically getting your teams in the right roles, looking at guest satisfaction scores, and to basically, and everyone, this is music to everyone's ears, increasing bottom line. So what you're talking about when it comes to bridging the gap and taking the time, that takes a lot of strategy. It takes a lot of time, pause time. It takes time that, in my opinion, and what I see as a business coach, sometimes I work with really smart people who are successful but stuck. I work with them to get them unstuck, and it works for many reasons. One in particular, because they surrender and allow me to create a space for us to actually do the work, whether that's an hour or 15 minutes in a week. You do the same, right? People will pay, going back to our kind of spending money, people will spend money to create just a space for them to plug into a strategic planning session for this, right?
Mhm.
And so talk about how the importance of slowing down, pausing, getting in a room and allowing you and your team to say, okay, hey, we're going to strategically plan. We're in control. Now let us kind of dive in. Just can you just talk about the power of that? Because I think it's really, really important.
Well, I agree with you. I think it is important, and it doesn't happen overnight. It takes time to understand the culture. I'll use a quick example. I worked for two luxury brands before I started my own company. And when I made the jump from one luxury brand to another, I'm like, oh, there must not be very many differences. But in actuality, it was completely different. The feel of the environment, the culture, the thought process, and the way that I operated in it. And you wonder how you connect. Do your values align with the company that you work with? So a lot of what we do is we try to understand the company culture first, and then how do we use that terminology to translate that message into how employees are interacting with guests.
Yeah.
So it is a process of first understanding the company and then understanding what the roles are. And then thirdly, how do employees, when they come into the role, understand what they're supposed to do?
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. Let's rewind for a minute and dive into a little bit about your passion, because I believe that success is never a straight line. And I loved your bio talking about people watching with your sister, and I'll let you kind of share that experience. But for me, there's always that moment for people where there's like this defining, kind of moment in their life that kind of sets the course of what they're going to do. Mine was when I was 18, my dad gave me a set of tape sets by Brian Tracy, The Psychology of Success. And he said, Jonathan, I think you'll be more successful listening to these people than you will college. If you get less than a 3-point, I'm pulling you out, but I want you to listen to these. And at that moment, I knew I wanted to listen. I wanted to write books. I wanted to grow businesses. I just knew what I wanted to do, right? It wasn't a straight line to get to this business of mine, but everybody has that moment. And so talk about your moment.
Well, I think my moment happened when I worked for Disney. I was very fortunate that I worked there as a high school student. And as I mentioned, my dad ran his own company as well. So back in the day when you'd have to stand at a payphone, when we were kids, we had to navigate around hotels and wait for hours on end until he finished his call with his business clients. And so my sister and I would just meander around. We'd sit, we'd just being bored, your mind gets very active. And so part of what we did is when I turned 16, while we were on vacations, it turned out that we spent the summer in Florida. And so I started working for Disney, and I just absolutely loved it. I remember my first day of work. I was so happy and excited to be there that I was told that my supervisor stuck her head through the window and said I was supposed to go on a break. And I didn't even realize that I was supposed to go on a break. So I went eight and a half hours straight without even taking a break. And
yeah.
I felt like I never worked, and I still feel that way.
Yeah.
I feel like every single day that I do what I do, we're making a difference.
Yeah.
And I think we make a difference in people's lives in a very positive way. People go on vacation and they want to experience that with their families and their loved ones, and we're there to make them happy.
I love it. I love it. And so when you've mentioned the word a lot, happy and happiness. You're in the business, Disney's all in the business of making people happy. How many companies that you work with have unhappy employees? And then what's the journey to get them to happy?
Well, I believe that in a lot of ways, the companies that we work with, they're investing in their employees.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't see a lot of unhappy employees, fortunately. I have to say I've worked with other companies in the past where people aren't happy. And as a leader, you have to find a way to, they have to find their own happiness. But I'm very fortunate that we work with companies that are investing in their employees and making a difference. I can tell you that they being employees have come to us and said that the way that we work with them, the way that we teach, is in a way that is understandable. In some cases, we've had team members come forward and say they had a learning disability and they've never been able to understand why they couldn't connect with what they were doing. And when we slow it down to make it understandable for them, it connects. So while we're kind of running at this very fast pace as like business operators, sometimes we have to kind of slow it down for a minute so that our employees can understand what our objectives are, and we need to speak in their language.
Yeah. I love that. Let's talk about what people do and just define a little bit about investing in their employees, right? So what do you find? Because I agree. I think investing in your team, employees, company, your people, it's critical. And people will, and there's a lot of stats we can point to, people will leave the company if you're not investing in them. Especially younger generations believe it's a two-way street. Invest in me and you'll get the ROI. Right. And so what are some of the things that you're seeing, Mary, as far as companies doing to invest in their people?
Well, I think in my industry, and that being hospitality, years ago, it used to be kind of like an inside joke where, you get hired for a company and then the next day you're basically handed the keys of the operation and you're running the place. And it was kind of accepted. But yet no one really felt good. They didn't, they couldn't, they had employees that understood more about the business than they did, yet they were being asked to lead them. And so I think now when that happens and you're handing the keys to the operation to someone and you've never really explained, how do I run this operation? They're not staying. They are walking away from that. And that's why we're seeing that exodus. And so they're going to places where when they're hired into a company, they're being invested in the right way. So I think that's really what's happening right now. Is in the past, it was acceptable and now it's no longer acceptable because, as I mentioned at the start, the employees and leaders are standing up and saying, I don't want this for myself.
Yeah. I would think that every company could use your training. Right. I mean, I know you specialize in, restaurants and residential communities, groceries, clubs, a lot of the hotel industry. But I would think that as we move forward over this decade, that more and more companies need to have more of a hospitality mindset. It amazes me. I was on vacation, so maybe this isn't a fair assessment, but my family, we went to London for 2 weeks and everyone was so polite and so smiley, no matter where we walked in, what type of store we walked into. And yet sometimes I find here is you walk into a store, people don't look up. They're not smiling. It's so easy to walk in and out of a store with nobody even talking to you, or, what. If you had to advise any company in the top 1, 2, or maybe 3 things to pay more attention to with their employees, what would those things be?
Well, I think first and foremost, the interview process needs to be rightly done. And what I mean by that is, are we hiring the right people?
Yeah.
And are we taking enough time to really hire the right people, or are we trying to fill a position? So that's going to be step number 1. Number 2, how, once we have those people and we've identified them as the right fit for the role, do we ensure that they're equipped with the right tools?
Yeah.
And so that's where the training piece comes into play. And then thirdly, how do we ensure that there's accountability for what they're being told to do? So we want to inspect what we expect.
Yeah.
So if we do that and just be consistent with that, there would be less ambiguity about the positions. And I think sometimes that's what really leads to this level of being disgruntled or not feeling like there's a connection. Or as I mentioned earlier, I'm working and making coffees all day, but does someone really care about the coffees that I'm making? And is it coming out the right way? And, it seems silly, but the designs that you put on it and the message that you put on the cup and how you're connecting with your guests, does it matter? Because everyone wants to feel like what they're doing has value.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. One of the things I always talk to my clients is only hire great. You should always be recruiting because it takes so long to find great. So I love that. All right. Quick speed round. You ready, Mary?
Yes.
All right. A book that's had the biggest impact on you.
Well, I would say recently I've read Bob Iger's Ride of a Lifetime. I've enjoyed that one being a Disney file. So that was a great book.
Yeah, I agree. I love that book. And I just took a master's class with him, from masterclass.com. It was a great class. I loved it. Best piece of wisdom you've ever received?
Don't wonder why people do what they do. Just understand that it was done and take action.
I like it. The number one thing you learned from working at Disney?
Love what you do.
Finish this sentence. One thing everybody needs to do to attract and retain more employees and clients is?
Have a great corporate culture that has meaning and value.
Tell everybody how they can connect with you and who your ideal clients are.
They can connect with me through Mary Dargenis Fernandez at LinkedIn, MDA Hospitality LinkedIn, and also on Instagram, MDA Hospitality.
I love it. Mary, I can't thank you enough. Think community. This has been a great talk with Mary. And, a couple highlights, as we talked about in the beginning, right? I as a business coach, I'm always listening for that one thing that may resonate of the many, many things you shared, which I appreciate, that may help people get a little bit unstuck. And I think one of the things for me that I'm pulling out is the importance of investing in your people. Mm-hmm. And looking at it as an investment and not an expense, and how Absolutely. That has a ripple effect into the culture, and them being able to have their voice heard, which everything grows, which is one of your goals and mine for clients, to grow their bottom line. So I appreciate you, sharing everything that you shared today. Think community, don't hesitate to reach out to Mary, mdahospitality.com, if she can be of service. If you know anybody who could utilize her services, send them this podcast. And if there's anything I can do for you, always visit johndwoskin.com. And another shout out to Lou Diamond of Thrive Loud podcast for him introducing us. I really appreciate it. Mary, I'll let you finish up. Any last thoughts?
I just really appreciate being with you today, and thanks for sharing the importance of caring about our employees.
I love it. All right. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Think community. Mary, thank you so much.
Thank you.